Hollywood stages the Wild West as an adventure, but no script captures the agony of real 19th century stagecoach travel. Inside a 4-foot box, passengers were tossed by leather straps so violently that Mark Twain called it being mixed somewhat. What movies won't show you? Journeys stretched for 25 sleepless, bone-jarring days, racked by dust, disease, and disaster. Why did anyone endure hell on wheels, and how bad did it get? Inside a Concord stagecoach, every mile was a test of the human body. The coach's 4-foot wide, 4.5-foot high shell forced knees and shoulders into tight knots, with 9 to 12 passengers wedged together with nowhere to stretch. Instead of steel springs, thick leather straps called thoroughbraces cradled the coach body. On rough trails, these straps turned the ride into a relentless pendulum. The entire cabin swung side to side, pitched forward and back, and bucked upward with every rut or stone. Passengers braced themselves against hard wood, but the motion was impossible to predict. A jolt from a corduroy road could launch a person several inches off the seat, heads and elbows slamming into the ceiling or window frames. Mark Twain wrote of being tossed into a heap at the front, sometimes nearly upside down. Charles Dickens described shocks enough to have dislocated all the bones in my body. Glass windows didn't survive long. Western routes replaced them with leather curtains that did little to block the dust or the noise. The driver, gripping the reins, had to anticipate every sway and jounce, steadying the team while passengers clung to whatever they could reach. Modern tests with accelerometers on replica coaches confirm what survivors described: violent swings and impacts far beyond anything found in today's vehicles. For those inside, every bump was a small collision, and every hour left bodies bruised and nerves frayed. Stagecoach travel demanded endurance not just for the violence of the ride, but for the sheer length and relentlessness of the journey. The Butterfield Overland Mail route stretched nearly 2,800 miles from San Francisco to St. Louis, with a contract guarantee to deliver mail in less than 25 days, a feat considered revolutionary at the time. On paper, the coaches averaged 5 to 8 miles per hour across open plains, but in the mountains or through mud, progress slowed to a crawl, sometimes just 2 or 3 miles per hour. Relay stations appeared every 10 to 15 miles, where exhausted teams were swapped out for fresh horses in a matter of minutes. Passengers rarely left their seats, and the coach rolled on day and night. There was no pause for darkness or weather. The schedule took precedence over comfort or sleep. For those inside, the landscape became a blur of endless prairie, desert, and mountains, measured in the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the counting of relay intervals. A single transcontinental ticket cost between $200 and $300, equivalent to $6,000 to $9,000 today. That price bought no luxury, just a hard wooden seat, a spot in the crowded cabin, and the promise of 24-hour motion. Every hour on the road magnified the fatigue, as bodies stiffened and tempers wore thin. The timetable was unyielding, the miles unforgiving, and the ordeal only just beginning. Dust found every crack and seam in a stagecoach, swirling in thick clouds that slipped past the leather curtains and settled on every surface. By midday, passengers wore a mask of gray, their faces and clothing so caked that even close friends struggled to recognize one another. Alkaline grit coated mouths and throats, drawing coughs and parched whispers from those trapped inside. The relentless dryness forced everyone to share water at the next station. One battered tin dipper passed from hand to hand, mouth to mouth. Army doctors tracing cholera outbreaks in 1849 and the early 1850s pointed to this simple act as a deadly link, as outbreaks flared along the Butterfield and Wells Fargo routes. Letters from survivors described sudden fevers, vomiting, and the quiet disappearance of fellow travelers, buried hastily beside the trail. The misery didn't end with thirst or disease. Upholstered seats and bedding, rarely cleaned, crawled with lice, fleas, and bed bugs. Passengers scratched at bites as they tried to rest, only to find themselves swatting at new infestations picked up at each stop. Medical diaries from the period tell of children arriving at relay stations with raw, bleeding skin, and adults feverish from mountain fever or typhoid. Inside the coach, heat could become a torment of its own. Crossing desert stretches, the temperature soared to 120 degrees, turning the cramped interior into an oven. Sweat mingled with dust, and the air grew thick and foul. There were no toilets on the road, only communal chamber pots at stations, if any, and little chance to wash hands before eating or drinking. Every mile weakened bodies and spirits, priming travelers for whatever new hazard waited on the horizon. Stagecoach companies promised space for 9, sometimes 12, but reality often meant 15 bodies jammed inside a box barely 4 feet wide. Any extra passengers were sent to the roof, clutching railings, exposed to wind, rain, and the constant threat of being thrown overboard by a sudden jolt or low-hanging branch. Inside, knees pressed against mail sacks and parcels, which always took priority over human comfort. Riders found themselves wedged between strangers, backs hunched, legs twisted, with no room to stretch or shift for hours on end. Wells Fargo posted rules in every coach, desperate to keep order in chaos. "Don't snore loudly or lean against your neighbor," one card warned. Another rule, "Don't point out sites of Indian massacres or previous robberies." Even spitting was regulated, spit with the wind, not against it. The etiquette was less about manners and more about survival. Fistfights erupted over a few inches of space or a misplaced elbow. A passenger letter from 1859 described 3 men trading blows until the driver threatened to throw everyone out. Sometimes the driver did just that, dumping quarrelsome riders at the next stop, regardless of the wilderness outside. The forced intimacy wore tempers thin. Arguments flared over who got a window seat, who blocked the air, whose luggage crowded the floor. Passengers learned to sleep upright, arms folded tight, always wary of the next lurch or the unpredictable moods of those pressed against them. In this rolling cell, privacy vanished, and civility was only as strong as the next outburst. Stagecoaches toppled with alarming regularity, their high centers of gravity turning rough trails into traps. Transportation historians estimate that up to 30% of these vehicles suffered at least one serious accident in their working lives. River crossings posed the greatest risk. Bridges collapsed, fords turned deadly in a matter of minutes. In the mountains near Placerville, overloaded coaches sometimes tumbled into ravines, crushing passengers and horses beneath splintered wood. Montana's swollen rivers swept entire carriages away, leaving only scattered mail and broken wheels downstream. Survivors spoke of crawling from wrecks, bruised and shaken, while others vanished into the water or darkness, their journeys ending without record. Robbery was a constant threat, woven into the daily reality of every stage route. Between 1870 and 1884, Wells Fargo reported 347 stagecoach holdups, an average of more than 2 per month. Outlaws like Black Bart, who robbed 28 coaches in just 6 years, became infamous for their precision and nerve. Treasure boxes packed with gold or cash, sometimes worth up to $50,000, made every run a gamble. Shotgun messengers earned up to $150 a month, triple the pay of a driver, but their odds were grim. Company records show about 1 in 10 died defending the strongbox. For guards and passengers alike, the threat of a masked gunman was never far from mind. Stagecoach drivers, known as jehus, took the reins for 12 to 16 hours at a stretch, steering teams through storms, darkness, and exhaustion. Their pay averaged just $50 to $75 a month, with no insurance if disaster struck. Many turned to whiskey to numb the pain and fear. Few drivers survived long enough to grow old in the trade. Most were replaced by the next man desperate enough to take the seat. Between 1870 and 1884, Wells Fargo stagecoaches were robbed 347 times, a stark reminder that the dangers of the journey went far beyond what Hollywood has shown. This documentary has revealed that passengers endured relentless, bone-rattling motion inside a 4-foot-wide coach, suffocating heat, choking dust, and the constant threat of disease and violence. Accident records show that as many as 1 in 4 coaches suffered serious mishaps, and documented outbreaks of cholera and typhoid claimed thousands along the roads. Despite these facts, many crew fatalities, accident details, and disease transmission sources remain only partially documented in surviving records. Today, travel across those same miles takes hours in comfort and safety, luxuries built on the sacrifices of those who came before. The evidence is clear. Westward expansion was not adventure, but a test of endurance and survival. The true story of the stagecoach is not one of romance, but of hardship faced and overcome.